why would Keir Starmer think that Peter Mandelson is a good person to give him advice? And I thought to talk about this, we could invite Brian. Are you there, Brian?
I think I am moving.
You are there. You are there. Good to see you. Now, Brian, I mistakenly put in an email or promotion for this discussion that you hired Peter Mandelson in the 1980s. You didn't hire him. You just effectively paid for his wages. So can you tell us what you thought about Peter Mandelson before you did that, and why you thought he'd be a good person to employ?
Well, I didn't think he'd be a good person to employ because I'd never met him. My background relation to that was that I was a great friend of a chap called Charles Williams, who became Lord Williams of Elville, and was leader of the House, Labour leader of the House, until he got mixed up in the Maxwell affair. He's a city figure. He'd worked for major city banks, and he, by chance, is the stepfather of Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he was a friend of mine. He was influential, very influential in the Labour Party. I ended up as with John Norton, who was Mo Molam's husband, as fundraising strategist for the Labour Party in '95. And about that time, Margaret Beckett, who was a friend of mine as well, asked me to look into the organisation of Labour. I went to Labour HQ in Walworth Road, and it was just a mess, I can't tell you, and suggested they needed to do something else, and they moved into Millbank and brought Peter Mandelson in. So that's the sort of sum total of where I was involved. I was running quite a big company at the time. I'd started it with £100 I borrowed, and I floated it for 36 million in 1986. And Charles came to me and said, look, there is this incredibly bright young man who we desperately need to employ to polish up Labour's image. And it was Peter Mandelson. He said, we haven't got any funds to do it. So would you donate? And I donated, I think, £20,000 in 1980, whenever Peter joined, to employ Peter. It was quite a lot of money then. Still is a lot of money. And I had dinner with him, and immediately took a dislike to him. Partly because he tried to get me to go home, and he had a very strange relationship with a friend of his. He's come out as gay since then, and good luck to him. I hope he's happy, and I'm sure he is. But he had a relationship with a chap who had a girlfriend, and he said, I want you to come to dinner, Brian. We play lovely games after dinner. And as I was no good at Ludo, I decided not to go because I thought I might get beaten. But and I immediately thought, I thought he was a slimy git, if you want to know. And I thought he was just awful. And I thought he had all the wrong attributes. And he certainly, I've never changed. I've never changed that view. I know him well. I bump into Labour Party conferences, and I'll tell you something about that in a minute. But I noticed in Keir Starmer's speech, which I thought was appalling, that he mentioned, I've got it here, Harold Wilson once said that the Labour Party is a moral crusade or it's nothing. Now, for Starmer to employ Mandelson is a direct attack on Starmer's moral view in life. And not only that, is his credentials as a Labour person, as I understand Labour. I mean, just think about it. Mandelson, I can't remember when it was now, but Mandelson failed to, he had a mortgage with Britannia Building Society for about 150,000 quid. He borrowed 376,000 quid from Geoffrey Robinson, a sort of a Labour MP, became Postmaster General. He borrowed, I did a bit of work, he borrowed 50,000 quid for a flat in, 40,000 quid for a flat in Clerkenwell. Anyway, at the time he was earning £43,000 as an MP with a £10,000 allowance, and he ran up 590,000 pounds worth of mortgages, and it was all completely crooked. He was lucky to escape censure. It was a political decision not to censure him, because he should have been censured, and that's the sort of man he is. He now runs a thing called Global Counsel. One of my pals from my days as an investigator is a former SIS chap, intelligence man, who has specializes in dodgy countries, you know, Uzbekistan and places like that. And he's developed huge, I think, on the spider's web's charts, you know, they look like a spider's web, and you can see the man at the center, and then it goes out to all their relatives, and so you can get connections. And right next to the main person in many of those is Peter Mandelson. Nobody knows who Global Counsel advises. Benji Wegg-Prosser, who I worked with at the Labour Party in Millbank, is the top honcho there under Peter, and it's a dead dodgy organisation. And for Keir Starmer to employ a man like that is an absolute disgrace. In his speech, he made a few little points. I've got them here. He said he talked about an ideology that's failed. Now, I've talked to you about this before, Crispin. The ideology is market forces. And the market forces is a Hayekian philosophy first outlined on March the 10th, 1947, at the Mont Pelerin Agreement, which I think is the most important date in modern British economics. And Milton Friedman was there. Keith Jovers was influenced by it. Milton Friedman went off and influenced Reagan. Joseph influenced Thatcher. Market forces was forced into our national life. It led to selling off of nationalized industries. It led to Reagan attack on government. Thatcher's attack on government and manufacturing industry, so that we've now got a bloody service economy. Even Reagan was puzzled by that, because he said he famously put his arm around her shoulders once and said, "Margaret, we can't all go around opening doors for each other. Now look at us, we've got a service industry with nobody to service." So it's a, you know, it's a terrible matter. But Peter Mandelson is a great supporter of market forces. Why? Because all the big companies in the world want no regulation. They want simply, they believe that market forces will cause the regulation of business through competition. Well, Marx had a lot to say about that. He said that capitalism would eventually destroy itself through companies eating each other up, basically. And we've got globalization, and look at the size of some of the businesses around the globe. I mean, the huge effect of Facebook and Google on our lives. And that we need, they don't want regulation. They don't want regulation about working conditions. They don't want regulation about borrowing. They don't want regulation about any, they want to get rid of the European Court of Human Rights. That's their aim. They don't want any, what they call red tape. They dismiss as red. Red tape is what protects people from exploitation. And that's what they want to get rid of. And Mandelson's all for that, because they pay him fat fees. And for Starmer to employ that sort of a person is just heartbreaking for me. I can't tell you how upset I am about it. Right. It just a complete betrayal. When it comes to what he said about government, I mean, you know, I disagree with Andrew with great respect, because I like what he says, right? But you do need to be a decent speaker and performer today. And I tell you something, I'm a great fan of John McDonnell. I didn't know Jeremy Corbyn. I was told he was a very nice man, but that's what people said about him, a very nice man. And it was, you know, wasn't convincing to me. I didn't know, but not a nasty burn in his body, I'm told. But John McDonnell, I can tell you, John McDonnell went very, very well in parts of the city and with business, because he talked sense. He was particularly well briefed. He was very cool, and had at his fingertips. One of my great friends is Prem Seeker, who's now Lord Seeker, reluctantly accepted a peerage because he didn't really believe in the House of Lords. But you know, and they put together that document, which I thought was terrific, but collapsed against Johnson's prancing around saying get Brexit done. I think that Keir Starmer can attack Johnson, which is not the same as attacking government, because Johnson is, I know Johnson. I was once interviewed by him. I tell you, it sort of sums him up for me. I was once interviewed by him, and I've done it now, and he was, we were on radio, and he had his little notes in front of me and wanted to ask some questions. And suddenly he went like this. And I'd realised the little red light had come on and we were recording. And I said, why are you fiddling with your head, Boris? We're on radio, you know, and he got very cross. But that's all about a complete and utter fraud. I mean, he's an abuser of women. He's denied his paternity. I'm even told that the famous red wine incident was with the next door neighbours. I'm told by a good investigative journalist friend of mine that it was about something else entirely, a continuation of his lifelong habit. And the fact is, you know, Brexit was postulated, a lot of Brexit was postulated on jingoism. You know, we won the war on xenophobia, and I had lunch with Maurice Saatchi and a guy called Alexander Downing just before the referendum. And this man, Alexander Downing, is the guy who brought Linton Crosby to the UK via Maurice. And Maurice, the chairman of the Conservative Party, of course. And he said, you are going to play the fear card, aren't you? Referring to immigration. I just exploded. I said, you know, what are you talking about? If you play the fear card, you're going to cause hatred and you'll get people killed. And it's absolutely the wrong thing. I couldn't believe it. Yeah. And I stormed off. I just couldn't bear it.
Look, so Brian, I've got to move on because we
just want to say one last thing. The fact is, if you're going to talk about jingoism, it is just an arithmetic fact that thanks to Johnson's, I don't know, insouciance, arrogance, bad behaviour and mendacity, it's just a little fact. There have been 4 times as many people killed by COVID as there were during the Blitz. And Johnson bears direct responsibility for that. And I cannot see why we cannot pin that on him, because there are lots of people in the Conservative Party. I've got two guys I deal with who give the lie to Nye Bevin. They are Kevin Hollingrake, who runs the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Fair Business Banking, who I deal with, and my local MP, actually, Hugh Merriman, who I'd much rather was Labour, but he was a good guy. And these people detest this sort of thing. End of story.
Well, look, Brian, everyone's saying I should keep you on. So what we have to do is bring you on another time. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'd love to, yeah.
Thank you for coming on. And what I wanted to do was talk about Peter Mandelson and the fact that he's been brought in by Keir Starmer. And we've got someone who was actually employed by Peter Mandelson. Are you there? Are you there, John?
Hi, Crispin.
Hi, John. So, John, tell us what you think of the reason why. Why do you think Keir Starmer has employed Peter Mandelson?
I think, in a way, Mandelson is yesterday's man. I've put a couple of things in the chat which explains my knowledge of him through working as his deputy very briefly when he headhunted me. And I think Mandelson was important at the time of Kinnock and then New Labour because of his network connections. He was a great buddy from LWT of John Burt and Aronovich and Trevor Phillips. And I think when Kinnock brought him in, it was partly because of his television experience. And I think Starmer may think he's still useful. He's got very good connections in the United States. He's part of a network which I've put there through Andy Beckett, the British American Project, which involves Wolfowitz, the man who was the #2 at the Pentagon, And Mandelson is part of that network. And it's clear to me that Starmer is also wanting to renew the American relationship. And Mandelson also has historically had good connections with people who've been a source of fundraising to the Labour Party, Lord Levy, Lord Mandelson, David Abrahams and several others. And as members disappear and as unions talk of withdrawing their financial support, I think he believes that Mandelson could help unlock some of those financial sources, which became basically funded New Labour and paid for Campbell and various other people Tony Blair hired. So I think he thinks he's still those connections, but Mandelson's an old man, even not quite as old as me. And I think a lot of those connections don't work anymore. And of course, in the 35 years that Mandelson's been around, he's really alienated an awful lot of people. He's not a very subtle operator. He threatened me when he hired me and then wanted to sack me, that if I did make a fuss about being sacked by the Labour Party, I might find it very difficult ever to work in England again. Now, somebody like that in the Labour movement is not somebody I think should be allowed any influence. But I think he thought he had that power. And if he did, then why was he in the Labour Party? And if he doesn't have that power, he's obviously a bit of a fantasist. So I think Starmer is in difficulty. He's not got many young people of talent coming through. He's falling back on some of the old stagers who still revel in the fact that they thought New Labour was wonderful, when to my view, in '97, the Harry Krishnas could have beaten New Labour at a general election because the Tories were in such a mess. So I think he's relying on past reputation. I think he's mistaken in that. I think, like a number of Labour leaders in my lifetime, he's had very poor advisors around him. I mean, Neil had Mandelson, Pat Hewitt and Charlie Clark. I don't think they advised him very well. I don't think Ed Miliband's advisors were good. And certainly, you know, Starmer's choice of David Evans is utterly disastrous, absolutely disastrous in terms of membership support. And I think he's very badly advised, and he's turning to some of the old names. And of course, it's not that Mandelson's coming back. He's always been there. It's just that he's not been quite so obvious. He admitted himself that he'd been working to undermine Jeremy Corbyn throughout his leadership. We know that's true. We know he's still got a very close relationship with The Guardian, which is what most Labour members read. And he had that when Mike White was political editor. He had it when his mate Patrick Winter was political editor. He and Jessica Elbott are very close. So he's very closely tied into all of that. And I think Starmer's just grasping at straws, basically. And it does absolutely nothing for the morale of the membership to know that somebody who is widely distrusted as Mandelson should be thought to be somebody who can be his salvation. I think it's really very, very poor judgment in many kinds of ways. I'll stick a few things in the chat which tells you why I'm saying these things and the sources for these things. I'm not dreaming them up out of my head. But that's the basic background. He's somebody, as Brian discovered, as he's told us, when he actually met him, he didn't like him. When he headhunted me, I didn't know anything about him. But it quickly became obvious when I worked as the party's chief press officer, he didn't want to supplement the effort of the members. He wanted to change politics as a top-down operation between people around the leader's office and the lobby. And members were to be marginalized. And he didn't need their money because he'd gone to other sources of finance. And that's what I think Starmer is now trying to do. And I just don't think it'll work anymore. When Mandelson was high with Kinnock and then with Blair, there was no social media feeding back. There was nothing like what we're doing this morning and what lots of people in the alternative media are doing now all the time. They're providing members with a network of mutual support, encouragement, and information. Mandelson can't operate with that. There's too much dirt on him, and it can't be hidden by talking to his favorite journalists at The Guardian and the New Statesman. It just can't be concealed anymore. And I think it's a real shame that Starmer doesn't seem to have quite cottoned on to this. And I think he's tying himself to a sinking weight.
Wow. Well, thank you, John. I think that's really damning. I think he is yesterday's man. He's definitely from I mean, how long? I mean, I was thinking this before. Tony Blair is as long ago from Starmer as Harold Wilson was from Blair. So it'd be a bit like Harold Wilson telling Tony Blair, "This is how you win a general election." They're from a totally different era, and to kind of put them in the same office, it's just ridiculous. I mean, there's so many young people that have been encouraged in the last 5 years to just dismiss them and bring in Peter Mandelson. It just shows a real lack of imagination in Starmer's office. I'm really sorry about that. But your signal, by the way, it wasn't very good, but we did hear everything you said. So thank you for coming on.
I'll stick things in the chat so people can read them. I'm sorry about the signal. It always seems to happen on a Sunday morning.
Oh, well, all right. Thank you, John.